And so I always want to make sure that my team remembers that. And just being with them actually in person this week in Nashville, I can see how much they value one another. Everybody walked in and people maybe they've never met actually in person before. Everybody embraced each other with a hug, and it's so good to see you. How are the kids? How was your trip? And it really sets the tone for a successful meeting, but also just really good relationships that will long live past their employment. And I hope that they always remember these people and keep on those friendships.
Yeah, and it's such a unfortunate, like, rare thing for teams to have that sort of cohesion. Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Ponto. Each week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Tracy Cobb. She's a healthcare guru, client success leader, and people-first professional with over 20 years of experience across acute care, post-acute transitions, and digital health. Currently serving as the Director of Client Success and Continuity at Unlock Health, she leads a team of client success directors guiding clients through impactful use of health risk assessments and strategic marketing solutions. Tracy thrives at the intersection of healthcare operations and patient engagement, always with the goal to leave every situation better than she found it. Her journey began in an acute care in Grand Rapids and evolved through nearly a decade in post-acute care, where she specialized in patient transitions and sales. A career pivot during COVID led her to the world of digital health and marketing, where she now helps healthcare organizations scale, impact, and connect with patients in more meaningful ways. That is just one side of her story. Tracy is also a wife, mom of 4, pug enthusiast, semi-professional chef, world traveler, outdoor fanatic, and sports lover who believes in the power of being surrounded by good humans. Whether she's solving healthcare challenges or swapping restaurant recommendations, she brings energy, empathy, and a genuine curiosity to every conversation. Congrats on helping healthcare organizations scale impact, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Same here. And I think it's a great time to be having this conversation with you because of your mix of kind of like clinical side of things and the client success side of things, because we're going to be talking today about how companies can rebuild that human connection and trust in a digital world, because it seems like every day you're hearing about companies and organizations that are struggling because there's a lack of trust in between consumers or employees and the companies, and that just seems to undermine everything these companies are trying to do. So how do you help companies rebuild that trust in the digital age?
Well, great. Thanks for that question. I think it's a really important topic, especially as we're coming out of, 5 years post-COVID when everybody went remote. And now we're really looking at, okay, how do we still value our relationships? How do we rebuild them? As well as coming alongside both your employees as well as your clients and making sure that you're seeing them as for who they are and as for humans. I think the biggest thing that happens is that misusing the technology that we have at our fingertips, right? When you misuse technology, you lose that human connection, you lose that trust, you lose seeing that person for who they are and showing up for them and how they need to be seen. But I also think when you start to use digital tools with intention, you start to actually restore that human connection that's been slipping away. And that's why I'm so passionate about showing up for my team in a digital world, but also with what I do in health risk assessments. I am now meeting a patient where they're at the most time where they're giving some really personal information, and I'm meeting them to help them guide them in the care in the digital space.
Yeah, I think I have heard other people who have been on the show talking about how there's more of a push to get that face-to-face time with clients or with patients or with employees, and not in a get everyone back in the office because we don't know how to lead sort of thing, but just restoring that connection is best done with the face-to-face, because when people know there's no filter or there's no other like thing in between the communication, it's just the air between your vocal cords and their eardrums, then it's a lot easier for people to trust what you're saying and believe that and if they feel a real connection with you, because there's fewer, like, it's less of a telephone game between different pieces of technology, and it's really just a direct human connection, in which people, especially post-COVID, are craving more than ever.
Yeah, exactly. I think about it too from how do I show up for my team and what does that look like and what's the end goal? When I worked in post-acute care and in acute care, I always showed up for my coworkers and my team. If I show up and I tell my nurse, I'm supporting you, I hear you, I want to listen to you and really meet her where she's at, what's going to happen is that chain reaction, and they're going to start to pass that human connection forward. So by listening, taking time, listening to my coworker or my nurse and hearing where they are, they're now passing that same empathy and that same connection to their patients. And that patient feels, wow, like I feel connected. I feel like you've really wrapped your arms around me, listened to me. You didn't just show up. And it really does impact the full system. And I think it helps patient outcomes, right? Like at the end of the day, people just want to be heard and seen and loved. And when we can do that, it does have that ripple down effect. So I always like to show up for my team. Like I start any of our team meetings every week with, I want to take 10 minutes, share something great that's going on in your life. And I don't want it to be about work. I want you to share something that personally you are excited about, something that went great with your kids, something that you're looking forward to, such as maybe going out for dinner with your wife this weekend. And we literally take that 10 to 15 minutes and listen to one another. And by doing that, we're starting to build that connection within a team. So when things do get hard or we do have to have a difficult conversation, they now see that I value them as a person and I've taken the time to learn more about them and better understand where they're coming at. And that's really, at the end of the day, what happens then is they take that same enthusiasm to their clients and they get to know their clients at a very personal level, even working remotely. Sometimes I'll get on a call and I'll meet with a marketer. We have an hour. We may never talk about a CTA or call to action. We talk about our kids' sports or what's going on in their lives. And that's really the power of building that relationship in a remote world, is just taking that extra time to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I think it's an important, it seems like, it's 10 minutes. Either people will respond with us, not enough time, where it seems like a waste of time for spending 10 minutes in a meeting. But when people feel like they actually have a real relationship or connection with their coworkers beyond the office, beyond just a job title, then when there are stressful situations, which is going to happen, or there's some disagreements, they're going to see each other as people first and not just someone in the office that disagrees with me. And that is going to lead to much more productive discussions and debate on what's the right course of action. And it ends up making the business side of things a lot easier to do and a lot more stable, because people know each other on a more personal level, and not just as that's my coworker that is always disagreeing with what I say. But it's like, if you understand their background and where you might not really, here's why they're coming from that perspective, maybe I can interact and explain my perspective better because I know where they're coming from. And there's I think that nuance has been lost because people are either thinking they have to be all professional, all business, and can't be themselves at work for whatever misguided reason they think that has to be that way. But when you bring your whole self to the work and people see it and respect it, and that's reciprocal between everyone in the team, then it leads to much higher performing teams. And when teams have that sort of environment to thrive in, then they, like I said, it passes along to the patients or the clients or the customers. And all of a sudden you have this community around a business that people don't want to leave, even if they get a shiny offer from a competitor. It's like, yeah, but I feel like I'm really understood and belong here. I'm not going to just leave because there's a sale with a competing company.
Exactly. I'm so excited to hear you say that because I truly feel that way. And by listening, and they're like, I want to lean in when things get hard. My team, they are the first ones to raise their hand and ask, how can I help? What do you need? They never shy away from taking on maybe a little bit of extra work to help their teammate because we have such a deep relationship. And our team, we have a lot of fun. Like we laugh, and I never want them to ever feel like they are just a cog in the machine. We are humans. We are dealing with humans. And that's the hardest thing about healthcare. We're not building a widget. We're dealing with somebody's loved one, their family member. We're dealing with really hard topics. And I want to make sure that we never lose that empathy or that compassion of what's behind our healthcare product. And at the end, it's a human. And so I always want to make sure that my team remembers that. And just being with them actually in person this week in Nashville, I can see how much they value one another. Everybody walked in, and people maybe they've never met actually in person before. Everybody embraced each other with a hug, and it's so good to see you. How are the kids? How was your trip? And it really sets the tone for a successful meeting, but also just really good relationships that will long live past their employment. And I hope that they always remember these people and keep on with those friendships.
Yeah, and it's such a unfortunate, like rare thing for teams to have that sort of cohesion. And it also like it makes, like you said, the balancing workloads or helping someone who's dealing with an issue, like people are willing to step up because they do feel like they have that connection. It makes the team much more resilient and robust, and all the things that so many employers are like, well, how can we why aren't our teams performing this way? And it's because they're not seeing them as people. They're seeing them as a job title or a role or an expense, and not as a real person that is able to contribute to what the company is trying to accomplish. And there's just this lack of alignment between what the company like claims they care about achieving and then the actions they take, which I think is also goes back to that like eroding of trust between employees and customers and then the companies, because the marketing messaging or the PR messaging that a company puts out, or like what their brand supposedly stands for is X, but then the daily operations and the decisions made by leadership are Y, and that disconnect is something that erodes the trust or shatters it in a lot of ways. And then it's just these constant cycles of companies doing something, and then it blows up in their face and they get really bad PR, and they're trying to backtrack or like scramble to fix things. But it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to rebuild that trust overnight. Like it takes a lot more effort to rebuild it once it's broken. And I think it's just, there's the way to start, I think, rebuilding it, which is what we've been talking about, is starting by seeing people as people first again. And that's something I think most of like the kind of tenured executives just aren't really equipped to do, which is unfortunate. But I think it's kind of almost like a generational leadership challenge or shortcoming that is left over from kind of industrial era thinking. And Actually saw a little like someone who does like EOS coaching for executives saying that like the newer like millennial CEOs are seeing come in are leading in a very different way because in response basically to having seen how the existing or like the more senior crop of leaders is not working anymore. So I think it all ties into this. If you're going to build trust with people, you have to be that like clear communication and seeing people as people and treating them accordingly. And that approach will actually get businesses the results they're actually looking for when it comes to growth and margins and scaling and stuff. But they've been trying to cut corners for the last 20 years and they finally have no more like meat to cut off or no more fat to cut off. It's all any more cuts are basically cutting away the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's, we forget about the person. Everything else kind of goes out the window. And using these tools to actively listen to people and, evolve, right? Like we're meeting today on, a video chat, and we use texting and we use email, and they're all imperfect mediums to communicate. And I think the one thing that is the common denominator on that is the human, right? Like who's behind that screen, who's behind that phone number, and also taking a breath going, that's what they said, but is that what they mean? And I think so often, especially like I said, in a digital world, we see it black and white. We don't get to read their faces. We don't get to hear the tone of their voice or maybe the tear in their eye or the smile as they're about ready to crack a joke, right? And so I think that's so important is we still have to actively listen, even in with these digital tools and giving people a little bit of a benefit of a doubt, going, okay, that's what they said, but let's take a deep breath and deep dive instead of maybe overreacting. Because it's like I said, digital tools can be an imperfect medium when used wrong, but I think they're also a really powerful tool when used correctly, because you're allowing people to also open up in a way that it's not sometimes face to face, which might be a little bit intimidating. They can have a harder conversation, or they can ask a question, or they can look for advice without feeling judged.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely so much of human communication that is not in the words, it's the way they're said, it's the body language, it's the vocal variety. And I think there's so many like so much of the way people respond to like general questions, like the one that always comes to mind is like, how you doing? I'm fine. It's like, no one's ever fine. No one's just fine. That's good. But we just kind of accept that and move on. But it's like just asking another question. If you hear like the sigh after the fine or like the hesitancy when they just asking a little bit more to showing, hey, I'm actually listening. This isn't just a standard templated greeting. This is actually, I'm actually want to know really how you're doing. That just extra gesture of caring can really strengthen a relationship in a lot of ways that people don't seem to understand or don't realize how important that is. Because when it comes down to it, especially when you're talking with team members and stuff, if you're showing them that you're actually seeing them as they are and paying attention and really listening, that goes a long way to building that connection and trust, because it shows that you have that empathy and care for them. And when people see that they'll want to reciprocate and like, or pass it on, like we've been saying. So it's just a simple, not being on autopilot as much, especially as a leader, to like take a moment and if you're seeing someone in the hall or you're doing like an intro to, like you said, doing those 10-minute how's everyone doing thing and actually listening, or like just having a quick like 5-minute chat in the hallway saying, hey, I saw you kind of like saw you kind of like you were doing this little like body language thing, everything all right, what's going on, how can I, like what we need help with, and just little gestures and following through it can be such a game changer, because especially if the leadership starts doing that, that's going to emanate through the entire culture, the entire company. But to really get the trust back in a business, it has to start from that C-suite, from the CEO all the way downward, with taking that first outreach and asking questions and actively listening. And otherwise, the culture is never really going to change.
Exactly. One of the things that one of my previous leaders did, and I still try to do this daily, is when I commit to a meeting with one of my coworkers, so whether that's our weekly touch base, like our one-on-ones, one of the things I do is I promise them that you have my undivided attention. So I turn off all notifications on my Slack. I minimize my email, appointments get turned off. I actually put my phone on do not disturb in my watch, put it away. And I really show up to them as, you know, you've carved out 30 minutes of your time that I know is really hard for you to carve out. And I want to be respectful of that. So I'm going to show up and I'm going to be actively listening, meeting you where you are, and just rebuilding that trust. Because I think for so many years, how many meetings have you gone to where somebody said, yep, let's schedule this meeting, let's get on, and they spend the next hour, yep, okay, and they're answering Slacks, responding to emails, checking their phone. And that both verbal and nonverbal cues tells that person that they're not important, that their time doesn't matter, and they have more important things to do. And so by showing up and actually listening and turning off that noise, even in a digital world space, really makes a difference. And you really start to build that trust. And you also start leading by example by saying, this is how I'm going to show up for the meeting. I hope now when you meet with clients and other coworkers that you show up in the same way. And I think from a leadership perspective, that is something that is missing currently in our environment in the digital space, but so important to build that human connection of just turning off that noise. Because, 15, 20 years ago, when you had a meeting in the office, you didn't have the pings and the dings and the, chimes of all that digital noise going on in the background. And it was easier to listen to people face to face. So how do we replicate that in a digital world? And it's turning off that noise and making sure that that person sees and hears that they're important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for connecting with me today, Tracy. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection Podcast, please leave a review, and share it. If you'd like to connect with myself or Tracy, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.